what we're doing today, we're going to be looking at some clones, some inspirations, some dupes, basically some fragrances from clone houses inspired by an original. I'm going to look at 3 different versions, see which is sort of the best really. I don't know what I'm going to kind of come up with a clickbait title for the video. I don't know. Something original, something that nobody's ever used before. No, that's not going to work. No, been done before. I've got it. Word to your mother. My name's Steve, this channel is Frags to Riches, and thanks for tuning in. And for any new subscribers, in case you're wondering, that word to your mother thing is ironic. I originally did it ironically as an English white dude saying something that Vanilla Ice said back in the day. It was just a way of not saying, hey guys, welcome to my channel. So today we are looking at clones, inspirations, dupes, however you want to call them. But I don't want to spend loads of money on Roja Elysium. So it gets loads of hype and it gets compared. It's meant to be a really easy to reach, really easy to wear, very compliment getting. So I wanted to try it. So I've got a sample of the original and I've got 3 different clones / inspirations to look at. So I'm going to kind of give you my feedback and tell you which ones are better for whatever reasons, and ultimately which one is my favourite. So Roja Elysium has a shit ton of notes, so I'm not going to list them all. But what I get from the fragrance is a very fresh opening. It's kind of quite citrusy with the grapefruit, so it gives it a kind of nice little citrusy, sweet opening that's quite fresh, with just a touch of greenness. And as it slowly starts to dry down, the vetiver comes through a lot more prominently. And then into the base, you get the ambergris comes through, and I get a bit of vanilla, but not too much. To left with this very smooth, quite sweet but yet fresh and clean fragrance that's very easy to wear, and I can see why it has appeal. It's very versatile, very easy to wear, very clean, and it's got so much going on, but it's so well blended. It comes as one, so none of the notes really stand out, but I certainly notice the sort of ambergris that gives it this kind of nice smooth sweetness, with the vetiver which gives it a kind of nice cleanness and the lovely fresh opening. So I can see why it gets hype and why people like it, and it's just very super versatile. So before I start looking at the first inspiration, what I will say is I'm looking at 3 different clone houses today. I'm going to look at Rosa Salas's version and their inspiration. I'm going to look at Alexandria Fragrances and Perfume Parlours. So as we go through, I'll explain obviously the names and the prices, etc. But none of them are an exact match in my opinion. None of them are bad. So if you've got an allegiance or a preference over a certain clone house, you might just want to go with that. But none of them are bad. They all basically take what I mentioned before and have slightly different balance levels, where Roja's is very well blended and smooth and all as one. Some of them are a bit more prominent in the freshness, some are a bit more prominent in the kind of vetiver, some of them have kind of a little bit less of the sort of ambergris, which probably ambroxan type accord. So they all certainly smell similar, but they are all different, and I do have a preference. So the first one I'm looking at is from the house of Rosa Salas. Now before I continue, I should just remind you that in the description down below the video you'll see a discount code for Rosa Salas with 10% off if you use the code FRAG2RICHES. So it's not Frags to Riches, it's Frag to Riches, and you get 10% off. If you think I'm a shill, don't use the code, don't get a discount if you don't want to kind of use it. I've done plenty of reviews of Rosa Salas. I've not always been, really positive, so I'd like to think I'm balanced, but again, I don't think it sways me. But yeah, don't use the code if you don't want to, just thought I'd let you know. Anyway, so the fragrance from Rosa Salas is Abism. So it's 027 or 027 Abism, and this is their version. Now what I will say straight from the bat is this is the version to go for if you are a vetiver lover, because the vetiver in this is a lot more prominent than the original in my opinion, and that vetiver is more earthy, where the original from Roja is the vetiver is a bit of a cleaner, kind of fresher vetiver. The vetiver in this is not only more prominent, it's more earthy. Now it's not to say that this is a real kind of earthy, dirty fragrance, because it's not. It's still very kind of clean and fresh, but it is definitely more prominent on the vetiver, and the citruses aren't as prominent. What I would say is the citruses are kind of there, they're not as kind of noticeable as they are in the original, and the sort of sweeter grapefruity type of chord is not as prominent in this one as well. So this has some kind of fresh citrus to the opening, but it's not as strong as the original, but it's lacking that sort of subtle sweetness that you get from the original, which is probably coming from the grapefruit. And then as it dries down, again, I would say that the ambergris type of chord and the sort of vanilla, which gives it sort of smooth, kind of soft, almost kind of subtle creaminess to the original, is not, again, as prominent in this. The ambergris and the vanilla is not as prominent as this. On the dry down, this is a very sort of vetiver heavy version, I would say. So if you like vetiver and you like your vetiver a bit more earthy than a kind of fresh, then this is the version to go for, I would say. Again, very nice, very pleasant, very easy to wear, but it's just not as kind of well balanced between the different accords as the original. This is the citrus is there, I'd say the grapefruit's dialed down, as is the ambergris and kind of the vanilla, and it does have some slight sort of hint of greenness to it as the original, but the vetiver is certainly a bit more sort of amped and it is a bit more earthy. Performance wise, again, totally fine. It was probably just as good as the original, if not a little bit better. So I got a good couple of hours of projection, and it lasted, it did towards sort of, we're fairly close after about 4 or 5 hours, it's fairly close, but I could still smell it at the end of the day. So it did last over 6 hours, 6 to 7 hours, I would say. So yeah, this version I would say go for if you like the original, but you are a vetiver lover, go for Abism from Rosa Salas. Next up we have the House of Alexandria Fragrances, and their version is called Zion. Now what I will say about this version is, of the 3 that I've tested, this is probably the closest match to the original, but it's still not perfect. It's almost like a slightly more subtle / dialed down version of the original. Most of the elements are there, but again, the balancing isn't quite the same and as kind of smooth as the original. I would say the vetiver again is a little bit more prominent than the original, but compared to the Rosa Salas version, this vetiver is a bit of a cleaner vetiver rather than an earthy vetiver. So this one, the vetiver is a little bit more amped, but it is a cleaner kind of vetiver, so it's kind of a bit more, the vetiver is similar to the original, but it is a little bit more amped, and in the opening the citruses aren't as kind of prominent. They are there, again they are there, but they're not as kind of obvious as they are in the original, which is a real shame. But the main thing I kind of noticed the sort of difference, again I think this is probably the closest version, but the main sort of difference I noticed, particularly in the opening into the mids, is the Alexandria version does seem to be lacking that's very sort of subtle, sort of green freshness that you get from the original. Particularly in the opening to the mids in the original, there's a very subtle kind of greenness that gives it a little bit of a kind of zingy freshness, which you don't get me wrong, it's very clean and it is fresh, the Alexandria one, but it's lacking that kind of green, subtle green chord that gives it a little bit of a zing. And into the dry down, into the base, I would say the Alexandria version again isn't quite as sweet. Not that the original is, you know, a sugar bomb or anything, it's not. But again, I think with this sort of ambergris and the vanilla in the base of the original, it just gives it a very kind of soft, subtle kind of pleasant sweetness. It's not a sweet fragrance, I would say, but there's a subtleness to it. This one, I say, doesn't kind of have that. So it's a little bit more, I don't want to use the word basic because that's kind of, it's almost like a little bit more of a basic toned down version of the original. So all the elements are there, but the citruses, as I say, aren't as prominent. The vetiver is a bit more amped, but it is a clean vet. And then in the base, it's not as kind of smooth and subtly sweet. So, but you are left with a very clean, easy to wear, vetiver based, kind of vetiver prominent fragrance. So this is probably the closest of the 3, I would say. So that's Alexandria Fragrances Zion. Before I move on to the next fragrance, I should also say that the performance again was sort of pretty similar to the original. Probably not quite as good as the original, but not bad. It's lasted, I could still smell it at the end of the day, but it was a skin scent for longer. It wore a bit closer. It was, again, I don't know if it was because of that lacking that subtle green zinginess. It didn't have as much pop as the original, so it kind of felt like it wore a bit closer. So again, I did get a couple of hours of kind of projection, and it did last over 6 hours, but it was probably more like sort of 6 to 7 than sort of 7 plus. And again, for the last sort of 2 or 3 hours, it was quite close. It was a bit more close wearing than compared to the original, but it did actually last. I thought it wasn't there because it was subtle, but when I smelt my skin up close, it was still there at the end of the day. So next up is the house of Perfume Parlour. Now their version is called Immortal 1871. Now, as you can see, their bottles have undergone a recent improvement. I'm not sure if it's just for this premium range, as this version, their extract de parfum fragrances are a lot more expensive than some of their sort of traditional and more familiar versions that have been selling for several years, which are in the region of about £12, I think, for about 50ml. So these versions are more expensive, but they do certainly carry a more premium kind of feel to the packaging. Now, what I will say about this version is, again, it does have some subtle differences, or in many ways some quite prominent differences to the original. The opening is a lot more juicy, I would say. It's a lot more citrusy, but I would say that citrus is quite strong in a sort of orangey mandarin type citrus, and also like the grapefruit seems to be a bit more prominent. But it's that opening, the sort of citrusy juiciness is a bit sweeter than the original. It's like that grapefruit has had a little bit of sugar sprinkled over it. That's what it kind of feels like. So the opening is more kind of juicy and kind of citrusy and a little bit sweeter than the original, definitely. Now, what I will say is that maintains that throughout the kind of wearing. So with a lot of the other versions where they open, again, quite citrus heavy, or citrus prominent, I should say, it does kind of balance down to have a subtle citrus in the sort of background, and kind of where this, the citrus and that sort of juicy, sugary grapefruit does actually remain. And I really enjoy it, I've got to say. I really like that accord, that sort of sugary grapefruit mandarin accord, which does remain. So yeah, the citruses are more amped in this version compared to the original. And then as it goes, I'm actually wearing it on this arm, as it sort of goes into the dry down, it does maintain that, and it does keep those citruses more prominently. And I would say the vetiver isn't as strong as the other two versions or the original. It is there, but it's a lot more kind of subtle. So again, it's that all the accords are there, but the balancing is slightly different. So this one, the citrus and the sort of sweetness and the juiciness is a bit more amped compared to the original. So it's not there is a very subtle green zinginess to it as well, but into the dry down, those accords just still become more prominent to me. The vetiver is definitely there, and it does carry the sort of ambergris kind of soft sweetness, and the smoothness is there as well, but again, probably not as obvious as it is in the original. And the vanilla, I get a sort of subtle, very subtle creamy sweetness from it, but it's more of a juicy sweetness. So I've said the word juicy and sweet a lot there, I apologise. So yeah, that is this version. So as I said, they all carry the same, they all smell similar to the original, but they just have different balances, where the vetiver is not as prominent in this, but it is there, and it is a clean vetiver compared to an earthy vetiver. And that sort of sweetness is a little bit more amped. This is definitely sweeter than the original. It's more juicy, and the ambergris is there. It's probably more prominent than some of the other two versions, but again, probably not as smooth and as well blended as the original. Now, what I will say is this is my favourite version of the three. Now, as I say, I'm not saying it's the best, and in the sense that it's the closest to the original, but it's the one that I enjoy more. So anybody that watches this channel, you will know that I love the note of kind of mandarin and that kind of that chord I really like, and this is prominent in this. That kind of, I'm going to say it again one more time, that juicy sweetness is there, and I really enjoy that, and it lasts, and it's very prominent. Where a lot of the others, they lose it off as it comes out of the sort of opening into the sort of mids and the dry down. This remains. And this one has the best performance of the three as well. This is a bit heavier, and what I will say is when you first apply it on the skin, there is a very subtle kind of oiliness to it, but this does feel a bit denser and thicker than the original, I would say, and the other two. So that's probably why this has a better performance. It just feels a bit thicker and a bit denser, where the original feels a bit kind of lighter, a bit breezy like a clone. This does feel like an extrait de parfum. It does feel like a stronger, heavier version, and it does last as so. So performance was really good. I've got 2 to 3 hours of projection, and this easily lasted all day, 7, 8 hours. So this is my favorite. So there you go, that's my little summary. If you are a vetiver lover, particularly an earthy vetiver, I would say go for the Rosa Salas and remember to use the discount code. If you want something as close to the original as you can get, I wouldn't say it's identical, but probably the Alexandria one is probably the closest of the three. But if you like those citruses that you get in the original and you want them to last a bit longer and to be a bit more prominent, then I would say go for the Perfume Parlour version, and that's what I like from the original, and that's what I want more of, so that's my preference. I do have a Perfume Parlour affiliate link in the link below, in the description below. You won't get anything for it, you'll just click through and it'll take you to the website and you'll just shop as normal. But what happens on those affiliate links is me and other YouTubers will get a small commission for what you spend. Now, if you don't like that, if you don't want me to have any money, don't click on the link. Just go to the website and order what you want and I won't get anything. If you found this helpful and you do decide to order from Perfume Parlour, if you use a link, I'll get a small commission on what you spend. Now, again, if you think I'm shilling, I'm sorry, but you've clearly not seen all my other Perfume Parlour videos because I've not always been kind to them. So I'm surprised that they've still let me be an affiliate partner, to be honest. So, but I do really like this one, and what I would say, I've always raved about their Noir Extreme version. I would say this is up there. This is definitely one of my top 3 Perfume Parlour versions, and that is their version of Elysium. So thank you for watching. I hope you got something out of this. If you did, show me some love by either clicking the like or hitting the subscribe if you haven't done so. And I will see you for the next video. Take care, much love.